September 29th, in the year 1833, a chilling silence descended upon the grand royal palace of Madrid. Within its ornate chambers, a 48-year-old man lay in the throes of death, his body utterly ravaged by a venereal diseasia, gruesome testament to a lifetime of unrestrained sexual indulgence. Ferdinand VII, King of Spain, was succumbing in the most humiliating manner imaginable for a monarch, consumed by the advanced stages of syphilis, a direct consequence of a life dedicated to the most depraved pleasures. His tormented groans echoed eerily through the palace corridors, mingling with the hushed whispers of his attending physicians, who desperately attempted to soothe the foul ulcers that marred his once regal form. The irony was brutal, inescapable. The man who had tirelessly championed himself as the defender of Catholic morality and the bedrock of Spanish tradition was being devoured from within by the very sins he publicly condemned. But how did Ferdinand VII descend to become arguably the most perverse and universally despised king in Spanish history? To comprehend the complete moral downfall of this monarch, one must rewind to the genesis of his life and peel back the layers of sordid secrets that forever stained the ancient Spanish crown. Ferdinand's tumultuous life began on October 14th, in the year 1784, in a Spain that, despite nascent challenges, still commanded respect as one of Europe's premier powers. Born to Charles IV and Maria Louisa of Parma, he was raised within a palace environment that was less a center of governance and more a hotbed of intrigue, where sexual betrayals and cunning manipulations were far more commonplace than dignified royal audiences. His mother, Queen Maria Louisa, was infamous for her numerous lovers, among whom the most notorious was Manuel Godoy, a charismatic commoner who, through his unparalleled influence over the royal family, effectively governed Spain for years. From his earliest youth, Ferdinand displayed a disturbingly cruel and volatile personality. By the tender age of 10, he already exhibited unmistakable signs of extreme sadism towards animals and even his personal servants. Contemporary accounts paint a grim picture. He would delight in torturing cats for entertainment, reveling in their suffering, and force servants into humiliating and degrading acts solely for his amusement. His tutors, genuinely alarmed by his burgeoning depravity, attempted to curb his behavior, but they were systematically dismissed or swiftly transferred whenever they dared to oppose the young prince's twisted desires. Ferdinand's formal education was, predictably, a complete disaster. Unlike other European princes of his era who received rigorous intellectual training in statesmanship, philosophy, and the arts, he showed interest only in gratifying his most basic and carnal impulses. He openly rejected his studies, held art and literature in contempt, and demonstrated shocking ignorance about crucial matters of state. His sole genuine passion seemed to be spying on the intimate activities of courtiers through tiny holes he ordered to be discreetly bored into the walls of various palace chambers, a perverse voyeurism that revealed his obsession with control and transgression. In the year 1802, at the age of 18, Ferdinand entered into a dynastic marriage with his cousin, Maria Antonia of Naples. This union was intended to civilize the wayward prince, perhaps even curb his more degenerate tendencies. It had the opposite effect. Intimate court reports and later historical analyses reveal that Ferdinand subjected his young wife to profoundly humiliating and degrading sexual practices, designed more for his perverse gratification than for conjugal intimacy. Maria Antonia, an educated and deeply religious princess, was left traumatized by her husband's sustained abuse. She began living practically in seclusion within the palace, meticulously avoiding her spouse's company whenever possible, her spirit slowly crushed by his relentless cruelty. The situation deteriorated dramatically when Ferdinand discovered he could systematically exploit his royal position to coerce other women at court. He began blackmailing ladies-in-waiting, threatening to utterly ruin their families and reputations if they dared refuse to satisfy his increasingly perverse desires. He developed a particular, disturbing obsession with married women, viewing their seduction not just as pleasure, but as a potent form of power, a psychological triumph over their unsuspecting husbands. Many noblemen, caught in this agonizing predicament, were forced to silently endure the profound dishonor inflicted upon their wives to maintain their prestigious positions at court. Their silence, a testament to the king's terrifying hold. In the year 1806, the premature death of Maria Antonia, at the tender age of 21, ignited widespread suspicions among court physicians and the general populace. While the official cause of death was attributed to tuberculosis, persistent rumors circulated that she had either been discreetly poisoned to end her suffering or had died of sheer heartbreak due to her husband's constant, unspeakable abuse. Ferdinand, displaying a chilling lack of empathy, showed complete indifference to his wife's demise, cynically commenting that he was now free to seek more interesting pleasures. The Napoleonic invasion of Spain in the year 1808 should have been a pivotal moment of national unity and heroic resistance against a foreign aggressor. Instead, Ferdinand shrewdly perceived the crisis as an opportune moment for his own self-advancement and personal gain. During the Mutiny of Aranjuez, which forcibly compelled his father, Charles IV, to abdicate the throne, Ferdinand exhibited impressive cowardice. Rather than bravely leading the burgeoning Spanish resistance against the formidable French forces, he preferred to negotiate secretly with Napoleon Bonaparte, offering to surrender Spain's sovereignty in exchange for personal guarantees of his own safety and future privileges. The infamous meeting in Bayonne between Ferdinand and Napoleon vividly exposed the true, despicable nature of the future Spanish king. French witnesses present at the negotiations described Ferdinand as a pathetic, contemptible figure who humbly groveled before the French emperor, offering any concession, no matter how humiliating, to maintain his personal privileges and ensure his survival. Napoleon, a man accustomed to dealing with cowardly and self-serving monarchs, was nonetheless genuinely appalled by Ferdinand's base character, later commenting that he had never known anyone so vile occupying a throne. Finding Tudor history fascinating? Hit subscribe. It's less painful than a medieval interrogation. During his subsequent forced exile at the luxurious castle of Valençay in France, Ferdinand lived for years in opulent idleness at Napoleon's direct expense. Instead of clandestinely plotting his country's liberation from foreign occupation, he dedicated himself entirely to carnal pleasures. He corrupted French servants, organized scandalous orgies with other Spanish exiles, and, during one of these debauched escapades, contracted his first venereal disease from a local prostitute. Letters, intercepted by diligent French spies, revealed his constant, almost desperate, requests for female entertainment and his astonishing, callous indifference to the immense suffering endured by the Spanish people under Napoleonic rule, a stark contrast to the fierce guerrilla warfare waged by his subjects against the French. Ferdinand's eventual return to Spain in the year 1814 should have heralded the dawn of a new, enlightened era for the war-torn nation. Instead, it brought only the grim restoration of tyranny and amplified depravity. One of his very first actions upon regaining the throne was to re-establish the dreaded Spanish Inquisition, not from any deep-seated religious conviction, but because its tribunals provided him with absolute, unchecked power to persecute his political enemies and, crucially, to blackmail prominent families. He cynically used accusations of heresy as a leverage point, forcing women to submit to his desires, promising forgiveness and clemency in exchange for sexual favors. His second marriage, in the year 1816, to Isabella of Braganza, was even more sordid than his first. Isabella, a Portuguese princess barely 19 years old, was literally sold by her family to consolidate a political alliance between the two Iberian nations. Ferdinand, now 32 and already physically and morally scarred by years of debauchery, subjected his young bride to even worse physical and psychological abuse than that inflicted upon his first wife. The Spanish court, under Ferdinand VII, truly devolved into a den of corruption. He institutionalized a system of royal favors, where prestigious public positions and influential appointments were granted not based on merit or competence, but to men willing to offer their wives or daughters for the king's insatiable pleasure. Ministers were chosen not for their administrative skill, but for the supposed beauty or availability of their female family members. The king maintained an informal harem within the palace itself, comprising women who were officially designated as ladies-in-waiting, but whose true, exclusive purpose was to satisfy his boundless lust. Ferdinand's personal sexual practices were of a perversity that shocked even the notoriously relaxed moral standards of the era. Secret court documents, meticulously discovered centuries later, reveal his disturbing obsession with humiliating rituals and sadistic acts. He would force his victims into degrading scenarios while being observed by other chosen courtiers, transforming intimate moments into public spectacles for his sick amusement, reveling in the power and degradation. The situation reached its grotesque nadir with the death of Isabella of Braganza in the year 1818. Like his first wife, Isabella died tragically young, under deeply suspicious circumstances. Doctors' reports indicated signs of severe physical trauma and profound depression. Her last confessor, years later, discreetly revealed that Isabella had expressed a desperate desire to die, to escape the unspeakable torments and indignities she suffered at her husband's hands. Ferdinand, once again, displayed utter indifference to his wife's death, marrying for the third time just months later. His new victim was Maria Josepha Amalia of Saxony, only 20 years old when she was delivered to the depraved king. This marriage lasted only 2 years before she too died under mysterious conditions, further intensifying suspicions that Ferdinand was literally killing his wives through a combination of relentless physical and psychological abuse. During the decade of the 1820s, Ferdinand reached the apex of his depravity. He simultaneously maintained dozens of mistresses, including nuns whom he forced to break their sacred vows through calculated blackmail and outright threats. He developed a particular, grotesque obsession with virgins, offering incredibly generous rewards to those who could bring him inexperienced young women. Desperate families, facing abject poverty or fearing royal disfavor, would tragically sell their daughters to the king, preferring dishonor to absolute misery. While Ferdinand indulged in his escalating vices, Spain's political situation deteriorated rapidly. The vast Spanish Empire crumbled, its once proud American colonies declaring independence one after another, severing ties with the distant, self-indulgent monarch. The national economy collapsed, plagued by mismanagement and war debt, and Spanish society plunged into widespread chaos and instability. The king, however, remained utterly oblivious to these pressing national problems, concerned only with satisfying his increasingly extreme and insatiable appetites. His fourth and final marriage, in the year 1829, to Maria Cristina of Bourbon II Sicilies, was a last, desperate gamble to produce a viable heir to secure the succession. Maria Cristina, at 23 years old, was the only wife who managed to survive Ferdinand, but this was largely due to the fact that he was already gravely ill when they married. The syphilis, contracted years prior in one of his countless encounters with prostitutes, had begun its relentless assault on his brain, diminishing his capacity to inflict further harm. Ferdinand's final years were a prolonged agony. The venereal disease slowly and mercilessly consumed his body, causing repugnant, festering ulcers, constant, excruciating pain, and progressive mental deterioration. His doctors, despite their frantic efforts, could not conceal the shameful and utterly humiliating nature of his condition. The court whispered endlessly about the king's deplorable state, a pathetic spectacle of physical decay and moral decomposition. At the end of September, in the year 1833, Ferdinand VII lay dying in his chambers, abandoned by almost everyone. His former victims had either perished or fled. His courtiers avoided him due to the nauseating stench of his festering wounds, and even his doctors attended only out of grim professional obligation. The man who once terrorized defenseless women was now utterly defenseless himself, consumed by the very depraved choices that had defined his reign. Death finally arrived on September 29th, 1833, bringing an end to one of the most shameful reigns in European history. Ferdinand VII died precisely as he had lived, in a sordid and utterly despicable manner. There were no sincere tears shed at his funeral, only the palpable relief of a nation that finally found itself free from its tormentor. His only legitimate daughter, the future Isabella II, inherited not just a crown, but a ruined kingdom and a monarchy forever stained by her father's profound depravity and moral corruption. The legacy of Ferdinand VII is one of the darkest chapters in the annals of the Spanish monarchy. During his 2 decades of effective reign, he transformed Spain from a once great European power into a backward, impoverished, and internationally despised country. His all-consuming obsession with carnal pleasures and his tyrannical impulses cost the nation its dignity, its vast colonial empire, and its rightful position on the world stage. More than that, he established a terrible and enduring precedent of how absolute power, when wielded by a profoundly corrupt individual, can utterly destroy a human being and, by extension, an entire nation. Today, more than 2 centuries later, Ferdinand VII is remembered not as a king, but as a predator who cynically wielded the crown to satisfy the lowest impulses of human nature. His story serves as a dark, cautionary reminder that not even royal blood can protect someone from the inevitable consequences of a life dedicated to unbridled vice and calculated cruelty. The most perverted king in Spanish history died exactly as he deserved, alone, sick, and despised by all who knew him. Subscribe for more tales of power, perversion, and consequences.